Okay, welcome. It's very much a privilege to be here and to present at this event. Just a brief background about myself. Peter Myers, I'm a SQL Server MVP. I've been working with SQL Server perhaps the last 10 years in the business intelligence space. And I spend a lot of time these days producing content for Microsoft, presenting that content, and mentoring and training just to keep my skills up. So I have about 30 minutes to talk to you about SQL Server. And of course, if you're not aware, SQL Server went into release yesterday. The product and its new offerings are probably about this big, and I have about this much time. And so the decision was made to excite and inspire you with what SQL Server can do in the business intelligence space. So with this presentation, let's set the theme. What is business intelligence about? Well, we're here to support decision makers. We all appreciate now that we collect vast volumes of data, but how do we make sense of that data to support the decision-making processes within our organizations? So the themes that were guiding for the user group, or rather the product group, was pretty much that only 28% of potential BI users have access to meaningful data. Are we getting the data to the right people that need to make decisions? Interesting to note that 32% of Excel users are comfortable with using it for advanced analysis. That's a trend that is growing over time. What we're finding is that Excel is no longer the tool of use just to consume data, but it's becoming increasingly the tool to produce your own solutions and analyze the solutions that you can deliver. And next we have that 31% of all BI initiatives partially meet or don't meet business goals. So for you guys as IT professionals, it's very much a moving target trying to keep your business users happy. The moment you meet their requirements with reports, those requirements have changed or they've evolved into something else. So wouldn't it be nice to think that you could empower those business users to solve those problems themselves and therefore offload the responsibility to keep them happy? And so very much these universal themes, Microsoft have taken these on board, and these have been used to help guide the product teams in refining and enhancing SQL Server to deliver the new features that we'll talk about in this session. So let's start with the first topic, credible and consistent data. It's just a fact. Companies that have accurate data perform better. So, what can SQL Server do to help you here? So essentially, there are two services that are going to address this. The new one, SQL Server 2012, delivers data quality services. The rationale is to have clean data, you need to have knowledge about it, so we can define knowledge bases. And these knowledge bases can be used to cleanse, standardize, deduplicate data. Master Data Services, in its second release, allows us to define consistent data. So collectively, Integration Services that was first delivered in 2005, together with Master Data Services and Data Quality Services, present the Enterprise Information Management Platform. Time for a demonstration. We decided that demos would speak more than words. And so this demonstration is going to show you how using Excel and a new add-in that extends the capability of Excel to communicate with Master Data Services. So first of all, notice the addition of the Master Data ribbon here. We can go ahead and connect, as I have already done, to our server. And the intention in this demonstration is to go ahead and create an entity or a list that will represent the stores that we sell to. So here in the first worksheet, I have a selected range consisting of the ID, the reseller, and address details. And as simply as clicking a button, I can go ahead and create an entity based on that range. I already have a model on the server, and I provide a name for the entity. There is a requirement that a unique ID is required to define the code, and optionally, and I'll configure here to place the reseller as the name. And as quickly as this, what I can demonstrate to you is that now business users or data stewards can go ahead and create entities, load them, and also maintain the data inside using Excel. So this is a new add-in to support the creation of entities and the management of data within lists. So what it's returned to me here in this new worksheet is the reseller 1, which really represents the published data that is now on the server. So we can see here in terms of the name, the code, and address details, these are the resellers we have. And of course, the benefit is that we've now got a central store and a managed list of these resellers, so we should have consistency when it comes to the reporting and analysis that we can now do on top of this. Now, when I scroll to the bottom of the list, if you know your geography in the US, you might notice something a little bit odd. Honolulu doesn't really belong to the state of Oregon. So we already have a problem with the quality of this data. Now, it could be tempting to come in and just make that fix, and yes, we could make that fix here. There's one other step that I'd like to demonstrate that's so simple. Just coming to the attribute properties for this state attribute, here in Excel I can then define that this is a constrained list. And what this is going to do is create an entirely new entity based off the distinct values found in this attribute. And so now in my model I have resellers defined, I have states defined, and if we take a look at this column now, you'll see that entry is constrained to the available states that we already have. All right, let's go ahead and delete this. Fear not, I'm not actually deleting the data on the server, it's just deleting the copy I have in Excel. And then what I can do is open up a new sheet, open up the Master Data Explorer, select my model, here's the two entities I just created, and a double click is all it takes to go ahead and open up that entity. And to simulate data entry, I already have the states of the US here, so I copy them, and I can paste them straight into the name. And note the different color there in the background that tells me that I've modified the value since it was last loaded. And then I can use this experience also to add a new state like Hawaii. And then here on the master data ribbon, I can publish this to the server and provide an annotation. Not only is it publishing that data and changes, it's also publishing that it was me at this point in time that did this. So it provides a very powerful way of auditing and keeping track of the changes that have been made to your members. The other benefit of the Excel add-in is that I could connect, open up the list, disconnect, take that long-haul flight to my home country of Australia, and I could, on that flight, make changes. And then when I connect at the other end, I can publish those changes so we have an offline capability. Now, for online capability, and what we had since the first version, is the Master Data Manager. So this has been enhanced with Silverlight capabilities. So now when I switch to the Explorer, what we'll see is that we can switch across to, in this case, the reseller entity. And this is all Silverlight presented. Applying a filter, I could say, go and provide me all of the members that have a name that is like. And I'll apply this. And that's helped me identify that row that has the incorrect state. And now I can come across here, and using that constrained list, I can define that that member actually belongs to Hawaii and provide an explanation. Last thing I want to point out to you here is that if we view transactions, here is the complete audit trail of that row or that member, right down to the change that I just submitted, changing from Oregon to Hawaii. So that's the story of Master Data Services, and I want to take it one step further to introduce the new service in the Enterprise Information Management, which is Data Quality Services. So the story continues to say that we actually have some new resellers that I need to add to the master list, but I am somewhat suspicious that some of these resellers may already exist in the list, so I need to identify them before inserting them. So to my assistance, I have already created a knowledge base using the data quality client, and the knowledge base consists of a matching policy. The matching policy is named duplicate stores, and pretty much the rules are here that the city and zip must be exact, but we're looking for similarity in store name and address name. And so what I can do is leverage this knowledge base directly within Excel using the Master Data Services add-in. And this is how it works. Let me go ahead and load the resellers that I created earlier. And then on the Master Data ribbon, I combine data. And then I select the range that represents those new resellers. So it's actually A1 to E11. For some reason, it doesn't want to copy that in. A1. Yes. To E11. All right, we've got some bug going on here. Let's try this one more time. A1 to E11. I think it did it right. Let's see. It's a matter then of mapping the columns that I have, and I don't think it has worked, so I'm going to have to try this one more time. So if I copy this, copy V A1, that still doesn't look right, A1. Demonstrations like this only fail when you're in front of a large audience. Do you know that? That's what my experience tells me anyway. I'm going to try this one more time. So back in Excel, combine the data, tell it the range that I'm combining from. So from here down to here. That looks better. I'm going to copy it for a safeguard. This time it's got it. All right. And you'll note that it's automatically mapped, where the attributes of my entity map to the headers of that range, with the exception that my reseller relates to the name attribute of the entity. Now, when I click Combine, all it is doing is appending to the bottom of my list the 10 new potential resellers. And here they are. In addition, we see this column, which is the source. These come from MDS. This is external data. So it's not yet loaded into the master list. And so now I can bring in the power of data quality services to help detect duplicates before I attempt to insert. And so here on the master data ribbon, I just call to match data. It selects the knowledge base, and I map across that the name matches to the store domain. Everything else matches by name. And now when I click OK, that data is being uploaded to data quality services. It is then using the rule that I've defined to identify duplicates and then return back the results in the form of statistics. And this is what we get to see. What it does is it discovers, if it discovers duplicates, it actually says they belong to a cluster. And so let me make this easier to read. Here we have the cluster ID. So in fact, what I can do is filter the table and say, only show me the non-blanks. And in addition to what we see with the cluster ID, show me the details. So what we then see here, let's put the name. For example, these two belong to the same cluster. And it is 94% confident that this row is the same as this row. And you can see why. The abbreviation is all that is different. So I simply delete the row. Here we see an exact match of both name and address, so I can delete it as well. Here, again, an abbreviation shows a pretty close match. This one is 100%. And this one here, 50%. We have an exact address, but actually the name of the store is different. And we may well decide there that that is a different store. It might be the same location, but a change of ownership. Therefore, we want to keep those records separate. So now what I do is go ahead and remove this filter, and I apply a filter to show me just those source external records. And so what we've been able to do is remove 4 of the resellers that we have, not necessarily on an exact match, but on a close match. To satisfy the requirements of the master list, I provide a unique code for these new stores. And then I go ahead and publish. And there we see the power of both master data services and data quality services working together to help remove duplicate data. And I want to emphasize the whole point of this, that this isn't IT driven. This could be the data steward in your organization working with a familiar tool like Excel. Next, and still under the topic of credible, consistent data. So it's just a fact. Companies with self-service data access perform better. All right, the statistics we have here is the top 20% of performers spend far less time looking for data to answer the questions that they have to get their job done. And so this introduces the topic from analysis services being the single BI semantic model. Now, the BI semantic model requires a really good description, and perhaps I don't have enough time to do it now. The great news is that I have a session at 1:30 that focuses on Power Pivot, Power View in some good detail, and I'm going to go through this slide in good detail. But what I want to leave you with right now is that the BI semantic model is a generic term that describes data modeling in analysis services. You haven't lost anything. What we knew as cubes or the unified dimensional model in the previous release is now referred to as a multi-dimensional BI semantic model. Power Pivot, as was introduced in SQL Server 2008 R2, is a tabular BI semantic model. But you know what? The success of Power Pivot, as I've seen out there with customers, has really made developers jealous. We have to do it the hard way. We have to build data source views, dimensions, we have to build relationships between attributes, we have to build cubes, aggregation designs, all to get these data models working. And yet these guys over here with Excel happen to be able to achieve all of this within Excel, and why can't we have this? Well, in this release you can. So the second tabular approach to creating a BI semantic model is targeted at the IT professional, and it is referred to as the tabular project. So these three approaches give you the ability to deliver a BI semantic model. All BI semantic models expose a multi-dimensional interface, so this is great news. Existing clients like pivot tables in Excel, performance point services, reporting services will just continue to work. And when it comes to the data sources that we can model on top of, we are no longer restricted to relational, as is the case for the multi-dimensional BI semantic model. You have the full benefit of working with data feeds, data files, other deployed BI semantic models to produce your own BI semantic model. Essentially, it's one model for all end-user experiences. And what I like about this slide is it shows you the potential progression, that what could begin as a personal BI solution using Excel Power Pivot could then become a team solution by using the SharePoint add-in for Power Pivot, whereby the Excel workbook that contains the embedded model is published to a SharePoint library. It can be secured by the business user. It can have a data refresh policy configured to keep the data up to date by the business user. And then via the URL to that workbook, others can connect to it and query it as a data model. They can use Excel, they can use Power Pivot, they can use reporting services and Power View, as we'll talk about shortly. Now, at that point, if we discover that the success of this data model is such that many users are heavily querying it, then IT might get jealous and say, well, this is really a solution that we should manage and sanction. It's clearly important to the business. So from personal BI to team BI in SharePoint, there is the capability to take that workbook and restore it direct to a new mode of analysis services known as tabular mode. So in this mode, we can host larger volumes of data, we can configure security roles, table partitions, and a new mode for pass-through known as direct query, which means that analysis services redirects the query to the underlying data store. In other words, no need to recache data. All right, so there is this path from personal to team and the handoff of that workbook for corporate BI. So let's take a look at this in demonstration. And I have a partially complete Power Pivot workbook here, so I'm hoping that many of you are already familiar with Power Pivot, having been released in the previous release. As an extension to Excel, it supports data modeling within the Excel 2010 client. So some of the new features is what I want to explore here in this demonstration. And the first one I think is perhaps the most impressive, and that's the ability to switch across to a diagram view. It's a what you see is what you get arrangement. And so in terms of tables, columns, and relationships, this essentially is what a tabular model is. So for many developers, perhaps they're already comfortable with this because you've already mastered how relational design works. So in this demonstration, I'm going to keep it pretty simple. I will explore this in more detail in the session this afternoon at 1:30. But a multi-select of 3 of my columns here in the date table, I can go ahead and create a hierarchy. And so what we have now is the ability to define hierarchies in tabular models. Next, if I switch back to grid view, so I right-click my product table and go to, here's a list of all the products. First thing that I do is right-click the product tab and I can add descriptions. Products defined by marketing. We can add descriptions to tables, columns, and measures, and we'll see shortly why that could be important. This column here, the capability to add a binary column is new in SQL Server 2012. So in this case, I have a photograph for each of the products that are being described in this table. We'll see shortly how that flows through to Power View. My sales table, which essentially is the facts, consisting of the dimension keys for date, state, product, and then I have these numeric columns that we want to analyze. So this new area down here is referred to as the calculation area, and this is where we can go ahead and define measures. And if you are familiar with the current product, you'll be aware that measures could only be defined outside in Excel, and it felt somewhat unnatural because all of the model design was done inside the Power Pivot window, and now you're forcing me to do some of it outside. Well, now you have choice. Do it the old way, that is still supported, or you could define your calculations directly here, in which case you get to test them by using the available filters that you have on the table itself. Note here when I filter by product 1, we actually get to see the result of the aggregations for these measures. So what I'm going to do is add a new calculation which will produce a ratio of profit over sales. So the name, colon, equals, select this measure, divide by this measure. And another great new thing we can do is we can apply formatting, and the formatting you apply here in the Power Pivot window will be understood by the client tools. So what you format here is how it will be presented in reports. Now the last new feature I'd like to show you is a right-click. On top of a measure, we can create a key performance indicator. So a measure can be a ratio of one measure over the other, or as will be the case here, it could be just a test of its own value. And then I can define the boundaries for my thresholds. So should profit be less than 5%, we consider that to be off target. If it's between 5% and 10%, then it's slightly off target, and anything above is on target. And then I can go ahead and select the icon style. There's also the ability to provide descriptions for the different metrics of that KPI. All right, and now when I switch across to diagram view, we get to see all of this here. This is what will be exposed to the end user. These columns are slightly ghosted because they've been hidden from the client tool. The sales table will only show these measures, including this KPI. So pretty much, in order to share that, it's just the standard publish the workbook to SharePoint. But before I do, let's just prepare a quick report. And quick, I could do this within 10 seconds. So in the existing worksheet, go ahead and show me from my sales what sales we achieved, the profit, and the profitability value and status. I'd like to see this by product. And then I want to filter this by a time period. So here's the calendar hierarchy, drag it into the report filter, and then I can go ahead and filter by a particular month within the hierarchy. And we still have access to those slices. So from the state table, let's go ahead and slice by region. And as quickly as that, we have a report based off our data model. The last thing I want to say about this is, I didn't have a lot of data in there. But let me assure you, if I had 60 million, possibly even a billion rows of data, even in Excel, for the structures that I have here, this would work instantaneously at query time. And that is the beauty of the Vertipack processor that is driving the compression and storage of the data that we load into this model. Next topic, reporting services. What's new here? Well, there are numerous new benefits. Just be aware that they center around the SharePoint mode of reporting services. So this ability to empower users with a very new visual design experience named PowerView that I'll demonstrate in just a moment. Increase productivity with user-defined data alerts. Increased performance and improved administration because now reporting services, when integrated within the SharePoint farm, is a service application no different to the others that SharePoint administrators are used to. All right, so it's easier to scale, to install, to configure using existing SharePoint skill set. Available to both modes, native or SharePoint, is that both the Excel and Word renderers have been updated to the Open Office format. So, PowerView. Again, I'm going to talk about this in much more detail in the session at 1:30 this afternoon, but essentially what it delivers, based on top of a deployed tabular BI semantic model, is a highly visual design experience that is rich metadata driven based on the definition that you have within your model, and presentation ready at all times. These were the guiding principles that guided the product team that produced this part of reporting services. In fact, the way they were guided was that everything should be a minimum of clicks, and it should always look really, really sexy and good. Okay, so the demonstration I have here actually switches back to the Power Pivot window, because there's more to talk about here, although I'll talk about it in much deeper detail this afternoon. Hidden from you at first, and available once you switch to advanced mode, is additional functionality here on the advanced ribbon. We can define perspectives that can narrow down the visibility of what could be a complex model. It could encompass multiple subject areas and therefore could confuse people when they have a simple answer they want from what they think should be a simple model. So this is available should you choose on this advanced mode. Here we have reporting properties. So for example, for the product table, I could define a default field set that consists of all of my columns except the ID, and I could sequence these columns, and this will simplify the creation of a report based off this table, as we'll shortly see. Table behavior, essentially what's the unique identifier? For the keep unique rows, are there any columns that have a direct one-to-one relationship with the key value itself? What should the default label be if it's used in a report? And what should the default image be? And now we have enriched this model with additional metadata that will drive a superior experience with PowerView, as I'm about to demonstrate. So in the real world, I would go ahead and publish this to SharePoint. It's like one of those cooking shows. I've already published it. And so now that this book has been published, and it's been secured, and I've configured data refresh for it to ensure the data is up to date, I can then encourage my colleagues to come ahead and benefit from the data and the business logic that I've embedded here by using PowerView. So welcome to PowerView. Note that we are in the web browser. The requirement here is that you have a web browser that is supported by SharePoint and that you have Silverlight 5 installed. Of course, there's a requirement that you can connect to a tabular BI semantic model as well. And that could be a Power Pivot workbook, that could be a deployed tabular database on an instance of analysis services external from the SharePoint farm. For the target audience in mind, and be aware it is not to replace existing reporting tools. We still have Report Designer for the IT professionals to create managed libraries of reports. We have Report Builder still, that targets the business user to create rich reports. This is a different, perhaps same audience, but a different purpose. All right, it's presentation-ready reporting at all times based off that tabular model. So for that audience, we have the familiar ribbon. I can commence by providing a title for my report. And then here on the home ribbon, I can apply a filter to the view. Now what you see here on the right side is the field list exposing the metadata from our tabular model. And so to filter by year, I simply drag across, and then I select, in this case, the year 2010. And then I collapse it. Now what that means is, everything that I do and analyze in this view will be filtering by 2010. So let's create the first report. And before I do, when I hover over product, that's where that description comes back to help guide the business users that are consuming the model. And now with a single click, I click the product table, and because I've defined that default field set, it creates a table based off those. To make it a little more visually impressive, I convert this to a card visualization. So I'm not sure if you're counting the clicks. One click of the product table and one click to change that to a card. I can then choose to resize it. I could also choose to tile the images across the top, which means that we get to select an individual image and then we get to see its card within. And as simple as this, I can click inside that area and then define a whole new table. So go and show me a breakdown for that product by region. And what I'd like to see is some statistics from the sales. So here are all the measures that I've defined. So I'd like to see the number of units, sales, profit, and profitability. And then I can resize it. And there's the ability by clicking on columns to sort, ascending, then descending. And now when I click a different image across the top, I get to see its details in the card, and I get to see the details for 2010 in terms of units sold, sales, and so on by region. Now by clicking in another blank area, I can start to define a new data region. And so here I'm going to introduce the category, and I'd also like to see a breakdown by region, and I'd like to see sales. And my intention is to show you this as a column visualization. So I update this on the ribbon. And then I resize. And now I have the ability to visualize the data. And by hovering over the different segments of the bar, I get a tooltip that tells me something about it. I can sort. So show me by sales ascending. And it even gets cooler. What if I click a segment within the bar? In doing so, it cross-filters the report. And it shows me, well, these are the products that relate to that collective pitch category. By clicking in a blank area, I restore the filter. I have room for one more. Okay, so clicking here, I go ahead and select demographic. And I'm interested to see, let's go for profitability, sales, and the number of products. And now I switch this across to a scatter visualization. Now, if you're running out of real estate or you need to see it more fully, we can always pop out. And this is what the scatter looks like. And then you can revert by popping back in. Now, I think perhaps one of the most spectacular new features of this visualization is the ability to add something to the play axis and animate across that axis. So now that I add month, let me pop out again. And now if we play this, we get to see the interaction of X, Y coordinates, size, even color can be driven by another field and across time. And so now by selecting this, what we can see there is our sales changed, but profit margins didn't. But for here, it did change. Okay, so over in this month here, and I'm hovering for a tooltip. So in the first month of 2010, we could see that we were selling more at a higher profit margin, but something happened over time, which meant that our profit margins and volumes were eroded. Okay, so essentially that's the demonstration that I have for you. The last thing that I want to point out to you is that what can you do with this? Well, you can save it back to a SharePoint library. And that's pretty helpful if you want to return to it or share those results with your team. There's the ability to export it as photos, or to export it to a PowerPoint workbook or a PowerPoint document, right? And once you've done that, it's surprising, but when you open up the presentation, providing you have connectivity to the server and permission, you can click a button in presentation mode that makes it truly interactive as you have here in the browser. So in the middle of that meeting, you can interact with it, you can filter, sort, animate. And so returning to the Power Pivot gallery where I launched this PowerView authoring session from, the capability of the gallery provides preview of not just the Excel workbooks, but also of the PowerView reports themselves. So I'll be a little bit patient with it starting up. While it's doing that, I was hoping that I might have got an email. No, demonstration didn't work as planned. Data alerts. The ability using SharePoint integrated mode with reporting services is that users can define data alerts under their own conditions and according to their own schedules can have email notifications sent to them. So no longer do they need to go ahead and poll the report themselves. When has a condition changed, the report server can tell them when a condition has changed. All right, there we go. There is my Power View report. Users can come along then and click on it. By the way, Power View reports can consist of multiple views, like multiple slides in a presentation. I only created one at this stage. So here they can go ahead and view the report, switch to full screen mode, interact with it with filters, and so on. And that's pretty much what I wanted to show you. All right, so that brings me to the end of the 30-minute session. There's so much more I'd like to talk about, but in summary, to wrap up, what you've got to look forward to with SQL Server 2012 in the business intelligence stack is that enterprise information management. You have got improved integration services, so more productive designers. You've got an improved deployment, configuration, and management environment with the new integration services catalog. Master data services has been vastly improved with its Excel add-in, and improvements to the internals, import-export scenarios, and the web application. Data quality services is new. Using knowledge bases, we can define how data should be corrected or deduplicated. Analysis services has on offer the new BI Semantic Model that takes Power Pivot, enhances its feature set, and then makes it available to the IT professional as a project. Okay, and then finally, reporting services. Integration with SharePoint is vastly improved for administration and performance. You have user-defined data alerts, and you have the new capabilities with Power View. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you get the most out of this conference.